It's time for Recipe of the Day. So I love blackened chicken and blackened seafood. I order it when I go to restaurants, especially here in Florida. It shows up on a lot of menus and I really like it, but I often find it too salty. And that's also how I feel about the blackened seasoning blends that I have bought and tried, which is why I decided to come up with my own homemade blackened seasoning recipe. I wanted to be able to reduce the salt a bit. I mean, when you do this like blackened seasoning food, you do a nice layer on the outside because that is actually what blackens. That is what kind of sears and toasts to get dark and give it that characteristic color. And so you do need quite a bit of it. But then if it's salty, you're adding way too much salt. So what I have done is I have created a blackened seasoning recipe that is very, very similar to what you would buy at the store, even in terms of the salt content. But I know and you know that we can then put less salt in it to adjust it to how we want it. So really the goal was a blackened seasoning that tastes like the store-bought one, but as you're making it, you can customize it and make it less salty if you want to. You can even omit the salt entirely and just add the salt to the food in the way that you want to when you're cooking. The other thing that you can adjust, of course, is the spiciness. So there is some cayenne pepper in here and there is some black pepper in here, and you can reduce or increase those to your heart's content. So before I tell you how to make this, I'm just going to tell you what it is. It is that blackened seasoning blend that contains paprika, some herbs, garlic powder, onion powder, and like I said, cayenne, salt, and pepper. And I want to say that it is different from both Cajun seasoning and from Creole seasoning. Similar, but different. You can't use them interchangeably. Mostly the issue is the blackening. The Cajun seasoning and the Creole seasoning do not have the ingredients or all of the ingredients that will cause that blackening. So the Cajun seasoning is missing the dried thyme and dried oregano, and the Creole seasoning is missing the paprika. So you wouldn't want to use those instead of blackened seasoning, although I suppose you could add thyme and or oregano and or paprika, but then you should just make your own, which is what I'm going to tell you how to do now. So as usual, my seasoning blend recipes have a set of ingredients for if you're making a full batch, like a half cup that fits in a 4-ounce sort of standard spice jar. But I also give you the amounts for just making 2 tablespoons if you just want a small batch to try out. So I'll tell you the full batch first, and then I'll tell you the small batch, and then I'm going to tell you how much to use when you're cooking with it, because it is a little bit tricky because of that saltiness and because you want that coating that's going to blacken. So I will do that as well. First, the ingredients for that full half cup batch. You're doing 3 tablespoons of paprika, and I just do a regular paprika here, not hot paprika and not smoked paprika. Neither of those would be traditional, although a little bit of either one might be nice, but you want it to mostly be just plain standard sweet paprika, which is usually just labeled paprika. 2 tablespoons of dried thyme leaves, not the powdered dried thyme. You want the leaves. It's dry, but it's little leaves in there. And then a tablespoon of dried oregano, similarly, the little leaves, not the powder. And then 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, a half teaspoon of black pepper, and a half teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And as noted, you can do less salt and you can do more or less of the black pepper and cayenne if you want it spicier. Now you put that in an airtight container and store it for up to 3 months in a cool, dry, dark place like your pantry. You don't want this out on the counter. You really want it away in a pantry cupboard if possible. For the smaller batch, this makes 2 tablespoons. You're doing 2.25 teaspoons of paprika, 1.5 teaspoons of dried thyme leaves, 3/4 of a teaspoon of dried oregano, 1/2 teaspoon garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon onion powder, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 1/8 of a teaspoon black pepper, and a pinch of cayenne. And that'll give you your 2 tablespoons. Okay, how much blackened seasoning do you use at a time? It depends on the flavor of the protein or thing that you're seasoning on its own. For something that has a milder flavor, you would use less of it. So that's things like whitefish, shrimp, pork tenderloin or pork loin, and chicken breasts. You would go a little bit lighter on those than if you're doing something that has a bolder flavor like salmon, chicken thighs, beef, or like pork shoulder, pork butt, ribs, those have that juicier, more flavorful meat. They would get a little bit more. Now, the other thing that determines how much you use is the thickness and the surface area of the meat. For thinner cuts that have more surface area relative to their interior, you don't want to use as much because each bite is going to have quite a bit of that surface area, right? Like if you think about like a fish fillet. I know I say fillet. It's okay. Fish fillet, you have that and then it's quite thin. And if you season it on both sides with a lot and take a bite of it, imagine the size of your bite, you're going to get a lot of seasoning. So you want to go lighter on that. Whereas if you have a larger cut of meat, even just think about like a thick cut pork chop, there's going to be more of that interior that doesn't have as much seasoning per bite. So you can go a little bit heavier with that. Similarly, if you're using this on like a roast, think about like a pork butt roast, then you're going to be slicing or shredding that meat. And so you just get that little bit of seasoning around the edge for each like quite a bit of interior unseasoned meat so that you can go heavier on the roast than you could, for instance, on, the chicken cutlet or that fish fillet. Okay. For single serving pieces, I can give you a general guideline. So these are things where like the piece of meat serves one person, chicken breast, chicken thigh, a salmon portion, a pork chop. You're going to be using about a tablespoon per 8 ounces of meat. And there are 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. So that will help you a little bit. But do keep those caveats from earlier in mind. If it is a milder tasting piece of meat, use a little bit less, err on the side of less. If it is a thinner piece of meat, err on the side of less. But in general, 1 tablespoon per 8 ounces of meat for the single serve portions. And that's going to be for like a big chicken breast. That's like 8 ounces. That gets a whole tablespoon all over it. For a chicken thigh, that's often around 4 ounces. That's going to be 1.5 teaspoons. A 5-ounce portion of salmon is going to be 1 3/4 teaspoon. And a pound of shrimp is going to be 2 tablespoons. For multi-serving pieces of meat, so like roasts and big flats of ribs, whole fish, sides of salmon, I can't be as precise as I was for the single serve. You're going to do a nice coating on there, keeping in mind, again, what I said earlier. Big, thick cuts like roasts, so they can get a good coating on the outside because once you slice in, all that interior is not seasoned. And so you get that big blast of seasoning here and there, less seasoning throughout. For thinner cuts, for ribs, pork tenderloin, the whole fish, the side of salmon, that needs less seasoning because you have more surface area per bite. So that is what you're thinking about when you do this. Okay. And then to cook with this seasoning, once you have seasoned up that meat according to those guidelines, you're likely going to need the stove and the oven so that things don't burn too much. For really thin things, you'll just need the stove. For bigger things, like if it's going to be like a roast, if it's going to be taking a long time to cook, you're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. If it is a smaller thing like a chicken breast, that's going to need less time. You're going to preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you're getting a skillet out over medium heat with a good swirl of oil in there. You're adding your meat to that no matter what it is. You're putting it in there and you're getting it a good sear, 3 to 4 minutes per side. And then if it was thick enough that it is not cooked through in that time, you're transferring it to the oven, either the 450 degree or the 350 degree, and it's going in there until the desired internal temperature is reached. That is 165 degrees Fahrenheit for chicken and 145 degrees Fahrenheit for pork and most seafood. Beef also is recommended at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, but some people like it more or less, so that is up to you. And I think that is everything I could ever say about Blackened seasoning. But if you have a question, go to the blog post that I'm going to link to and ask it in the comments. You can find the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is June 18th of 2025. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast recipe of the day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.